Hello class, so where we left off in class was this discussion about manifest destiny. Now this is going to come into play when we're looking at Texas as well. So 9.3, we're looking at Texas. We have only two objective questions for this chapter. And number one is explain why Mexico encouraged settlement in Texas at first. And number two, describe how Texas gained its independence. Before we get to our first objective question, which is up at the top, we need to discuss a little bit about what is going on in this area in the Spanish territory. So before Mexicans declared their independence, which was in 1821, we have sort of this mission system set up in these areas. Now, a mission system, it's sort of outlining two things. First of all, the Spanish who have colonized this area, they are actually mixing with the natives. So we have a lot of intermarriage with natives at this time. The Spanish also, their main motive when dealing with natives is to convert them into Catholicism. Now remember, Americans, we're focusing on Protestantism with Americans. But it's important to note that many natives in the area of Texas, they are Catholics. They are converting them on what we call is a mission. Now a mission is both an area of worship. It is also has a lot of farming linked to it. So many of the natives who are on these missions, they are actually being treated as slaves. They're doing things like farm work for free. Now, after 1821, which was Mexican independence, many of these natives are actually quite hostile to the Spanish on these missions, and they are actually escaping. The impact of Mexican independence, number two. So after Mexican independence, that means that Mexico is now free from Spain. They have declared themselves their own country and their own people. We have more trade going on with the Americans. So Mexicans and Americans, they're trading with each other. They see it as a sort of beneficial or good relationship. That is why when we think of the Santa Fe Trail, a lot of Americans are going to Santa Fe, which is Mexican territory, and trading. But one thing they start to realize when they have their own country is they have less control over native groups. So many of these native groups who were slaves or sort of forced to be Christians for many, many years, they are now angry, and they're taking that anger out on this sort of new country. So the other reason that sort of affects Mexico is the fact that their capital, Mexico City, is quite far from areas like Texas, California, Utah, Nevada. It is harder to control these areas because the capital is so far away. And they don't have the troops to control these areas as well. So now we're starting to discuss this first objective question. Explain why Mexico encouraged settlement in Texas. So Mexico, they actually start inviting Americans to settle in areas of Texas. And the reason why is that they are worried about natives attacking. There's not enough people in Mexico to really settle these areas. So that is why they figured, since they're trading with Americans already, why don't we invite Americans in? And they gave them land or land grants, meaning cheap land, for Americans to settle in these areas. The only two things that Americans had to do when they settled in these areas was A, they needed to listen to Mexican law. So they were now not under American law, they were under Mexican law. And the second thing is they needed to become Catholic. So they're forcing them to usually probably abandon their Protestantism and become Catholics for the land. Now we have a very famous American who settles quite successfully in Texas. His name is Stephen F. Austin. Now, if you recall, today in Texas, we have a city called Austin. It is after this man. He is one of the most successful Americans who is able to farm in Texas. But this also starts to make Mexico worried because as Americans are being more and more successful in Texas, Americans are starting to think that they should own Texas, that Texas should be a part of America. So what ends up happening is we have a few presidents actually offering to buy Texas off of Mexico. One is John Quincy Adams, and later on, Andrew Jackson. Both of them are offered to try and buy Texas. Mexico does not like this. Mexico wants to keep Texas. But it's starting to get a little late for Mexico to sort of take that back because now Americans are in Texas. This ends up in sort of a conflict. So it's sort of Mexicans against Americans who've settled in Texas. Now, the first American who is fighting is this man right here. He is, as I said, Stephen F. Austin. And he is going to the president of Mexico, who is Santa Anna, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. That's quite a long name. So we have a battle between the two of them. So in 1830, this is about 9 years after Mexico has their independence, Austin goes to Mexico City, the capital, from Texas, and he is trying to reason with the president, Santa Anna, that Texas, it would make more sense for Texas to be independent from Mexico. And he has a petition. A petition is a document with tons of names signed to sort of support this, saying, look at how many people in Texas support this, this move for Texas to be its own country. When he leaves Mexico City, he sort of thinks he's successful. But what ends up happening is while he's going on his way back to Texas, Santa Anna ends up arresting Austin. And he is sort of charging him with starting a rebellion in Mexico. Now, at this point, a rebellion hasn't started. All we have is a petition. But as soon as Stephen Austin is arrested, then a rebellion starts in Texas. This makes us come to our first battle in the fight for Texas to gain its independence. And it is at what we call, it's at a fort called the Alamo. Now, the Alamo is depicted right down here. There's still ruins of the Alamo today. What ends up happening is Santa Anna forces Texas to listen to Mexican laws. And this, of course, does not go very well. They're mostly Americans in Texas. Santa Anna then goes to San Antonio, which is a small city in the Texas area, and he's going there with an army of 4,000 soldiers. We have sort of a counterattack by Austin and his troops. So many Texans, they are trying to drive the Mexicans out, and they drive them all the way to the Alamo. What ends up happening, though, is Santa Anna sort of goes around the Alamo in the north and ends up sort of surprise attacking these Texan troops and kills basically all of them. So we see that Santa Anna, he is successful with this area at the Alamo. This does not last long, though. We have something called the Lone Star Republic. So after about 300 Texans are killed by Santa Anna's army, we have another Texan starts a counterattack. His name is Sam Houston. We also have a city in Texas called Houston after this man. He counterattacks against Santa Anna and his army. And as they're counterattacking, they're sort of yelling, remember the Alamo. So remember what happened in the Alamo. This is now a very famous saying in America still today. After this battle, Texas is able to declare its independence, and Houston ends up being the president of Texas, which is now its own country. So now that we have Texas being its own independent country, as soon as that happens, Sam Houston, who is the president, he actually invites the U.S. to annex the Republic of Texas. So even because many of the people who are in Texas, they consider themselves American, they actually want America to take them over. They want to be a part of the Union. This is going to cause a bit of a conflict. Texas is quite a large territory, and the conflict that it causes is that that Missouri Compromise line, Texas is below the Missouri Compromise line, which means that anyone who moves into Texas is allowed to have slaves. So the Northerners are worried about more slave territories developing. The other thing is that the U.S. worries if they annex Texas, they're going to end up fighting Mexico, because Mexico is not happy that the Texans have taken, or the Americans in Texas have taken back Texas. But what ends up happening is because James K. Pollock, he is elected as the next president, he is a slave owner. And the reason, because he is a slave owner, he wants Texas. He wants Texas so that it can allow for more slave states. Mexico is angry, and next week we're going to be looking at the fact that there is actually a war with Mexico.